Dragon's Heaven is an animated film that wants to be three things. It wants to be a showcase of really spectacular practical effects, it wants to be a compelling sci-fi world about clashing empires, and it wants to spin a tragic fairy tale of sapient war machine rivalry. Its short runtime and confused focus, unfortunately, end up being its downfall. It does undeniably succeed at the practical effects, at least. There's a grand 5-minute long intro where we see our robotic protagonists in all their real-world, physically modeled glory, complete with atmospheric lighting and dazzling music. It's largely disconnected from the film proper, but that just makes it easy to appreciate as its own artistic work, and it's kind of awe-inspiring. When the actual story begins, we're treated to a flashback of what the narrative calls The Last War, set to what sounds like a TurboGrafx 16 soundtrack, while our main character, Cheyenne, regales us with his woeful circumstance. He's a sapient mech, meant to work in tandem with a human partner to annihilate the free-thinking robot rebellion that dares to stand up to their human creators. Cheyenne largely succeeds in this endeavor, but unfortunately his pilot is destroyed in the conflict, leaving our big blue boy abandoned and forgotten after the war's resolution. So, without anywhere or anyone to call home or family, he decides he's going to take a big nap in the middle of the desert for 1,000 years. Seems fair enough. This is a pretty interesting setup that calls a lot of questions to mind. Being a free-thinking robot himself, how does Cheyenne feel about being forced to kill others of his kind? Does he think he was on the right side of the conflict? What is a human being to Cheyenne? Does Cheyenne have an identity or drive of his own? Does his free will amount to anything if he exists only to serve? The film never bothers to answer any of these questions or even acknowledge them. We never get too much mention of the last war beyond this point, matter of fact, and Cheyenne's traumatic history has little bearing on the events of the film. That's because shortly after Cheyenne awakens from his 1,000-year slumber, he's met with a dreadful roadblock to any kind of poignant or meaningful exploration of introspective themes. A roadblock named Ikuru. Ikuru exists, as near I can tell, to provide fan service and add a human element to the story. It's unnecessary, and given the film only lasts 25 minutes, she wastes a good chunk of important screen time. At first you're tricked into believing she serves an important role, because Cheyenne insists, repeatedly, that he can only function optimally with a human driver to operate his ultimate weapon, the Dragon's Fire. But this is just a bold-faced lie. The ultimate conflict is resolved without Ikuru's involvement whatsoever, which makes the entire point of a human pilot, and the Dragon's Fire itself, laughably moot. So many plot points are both introduced and forgotten over the film that it feels tragically unfinished, and it really didn't have to be that way, because there was actually plenty of time here for a good story. And on that point, if there's something that could have been salvaged from Dragon's Heaven, it's the rivalry with Cheyenne's enemy, El Medine. El Medine was a fellow sapient machine of war who fought against Cheyenne and killed his pilot all those 1,000 years ago. A good chunk, though not good enough, of the film is dedicated to the resolution of their grudge. Unfortunately, for all of the moody posturing and dramatic flair and tension, there's no heavy-hearted philosophy or thematically pleasing punch to their final clash. Instead, Cheyenne just shoots a big, hereto unmentioned gun, and El Medine dies without much fanfare. Altogether, Dragon's Heaven is a disaster of storytelling, but there's no denying it had style. If it had just learned to rein its ambitions in, and maybe spent less time trying so hard to be so human, it could have come out a great simplistic tragedy.